Long time no see. Okay. This has two parts. The problems with welfare reform campaigns and single issue campaigns and the importance of veganism as a moral imperative. I want to preface this with what I said this morning. I am critical of these things. I think welfare reform campaigns and single issue campaigns are really problematic. But I think that a lot of people are into them and who are very sincere and they think they're really doing good and whatnot. Listen to the arguments. If you don't agree with them, you don't agree with them. I mean, it would be good if you had reasons why you didn't agree with them, and maybe we could talk about those. But the idea, I'm not questioning the sincerity. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm not questioning the sincerity of anybody who's into these things or any of the groups that are into these things. I just think sincerely that they're wrong. Okay, let's start with part one, the problems with welfare reform campaigns and single issue campaigns. Animal welfare reform campaigns basically take the position that we need to make animal exploitation more humane. We need to improve animal welfare. We need to improve the treatment of animals and make animal welfare better. Okay, there are two basic forms of the animal welfare position. There's the classical position that groups like the RSPCA, HSUS in the States take, which is basically they don't think animal use is wrong or problematic at all. They just think that we ought to, that animal welfare, good animal welfare, treating animals humanely is an end in itself. Okay? Then there are groups like arguably PETA, Viva, Animal Aid, those groups that I call neo-welfare or new welfare groups, basically groups that say, well, we have a problem with animal use, but we think the way to end animal use is to incrementally make animal treatment more humane. So animal welfare reform is looked at as a means to an end. So it's not viewed as something which is itself intrinsically, desirable, but rather we will take welfare steps incrementally to get to an end where we'll either be using many fewer animals or maybe we'll even get rid of animal use altogether. It's not really clear. I will say this. In 1996, when I wrote a book called Rain Without Thunder, I think the position of what I called new welfarist groups was clearer then. I think they all took the position that they wanted, in the end, to abolish animal exploitation, but that they saw animal welfare reform as a means to the end of abolishing animal exploitation. It is not clear to me now that a lot of these groups really even explicitly embrace an abolitionist end. They seem to be equivocal about that, and I think that that's yet another indication that the movement is moving in a very rightward direction as a result largely of the happy exploitation movement, where a lot of people are now going back to eating animal products because they believe that they can do so compassionately. So these are the two sort of forms of animal welfare regulation. Now I'm going to go through the reasons why I think animal welfare reform is problematic. The first reason is the basic premise of the animal welfare position is that animals have an interest in being treated well. They have an interest in not suffering, but they don't have an interest in continuing to live. So killing them is not really the problem. The problem is we treat them badly before we kill them, and we kill them in violent and painful ways. That is the basic position of the animal welfare movement, or the animal welfare theory, is that animals don't have an interest in continuing to live. Now, it is vital. The number of people I have met who say, I'm an animal person, I'm an animal advocate, who don't know about what animal welfare means, what its history is, and how it's represented now. It's disturbing. So we're going to do a little bit of history and a little bit of contemporary philosophy. I hope I will not bore you. Before the 19th century, animals were excluded completely from the moral and legal community. We regarded them as things. Okay? They were inferiors. Some people thought that they were spiritual inferiors. We are made in God's image. They aren't made in God's image. Some people thought they were cognitive inferiors. We are able to use reason. They're not. We're able to use abstract concepts. They're not. We're able to use symbolic communication. They're not. Okay? And then there were some people who combined these. For example, like Thomas Aquinas. He didn't believe that animals were rational, but he also believed that animals did not have souls. He thought that they were cognitive inferiors and spiritual inferiors. The bottom line is, until the 19th century, animals were excluded completely from the moral community, and you couldn't have any moral obligations that you owed them directly, and they didn't matter as far as the law was concerned. They were just outside completely. They didn't matter. This changes in the 19th century. This changes, or ostensibly changes. What happens is, as a result of social reformers, people like Jeremy Bentham, it all started here in Britain. I mean, really, the animal welfare movement and contemporary thinking, contemporary animal ethics started here. And so you had people like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill and Humphrey Primat and a whole bunch of other social reformers. And they were concerned about slavery, and they were concerned about women's rights, and they were concerned about the way children were treated. And they started becoming interested in how animals were treated. And Bentham took the position that if animals could suffer, which they clearly could, that's all that mattered. And that their suffering had to be taken into consideration. We had moral obligations not to impose unnecessary suffering on them. That we had an obligation not to impose unnecessary suffering on them. But it was okay to keep using them because they didn't care about, they didn't care whether we killed them. What they cared about was how we treated them before we killed them and how we killed them. But as long as we killed them in an okay way, as long as we killed them in a humane way, and as long as we treated them humanely up until the point where we killed them, it didn't matter that we used them. He actually said the cow doesn't care that we kill and eat her. She just cares about how we treat her and how we slaughter her. That's the position Bentham took. He bifurcated. He said they have an interest in suffering. They don't have an interest in continuing to live because they're not self-aware. This is according to Bentham, if we kill and eat animals, we are the better for it. They are never the worse. They have none of those long, protracted anticipations of future misery, which we have. They're not self-aware. They don't have a sense of their lives. They don't have a concept of, I have a life. The animal's not thinking, I have a life. I'm going to do something next week that I really want to do. I've got plans. I've got all sorts of anticipations. The animal lives in an eternal present, according to Bentham. The animal lives in an eternal present, and she doesn't care that we kill her, or that we use her, or that she's our property. She just cares about how we treat her and how we slaughter her. That's all that matters. Okay. Now, fast forward. That was the beginning of the animal welfare position. From that, we got all these animal welfare laws in the 19th century and the 20th century where the law said, well, you can use animals, but you can't impose unnecessary suffering on them. Now, of course, that didn't work because if we use animals for all sorts of unnecessary purposes, and all of our uses of animals are unnecessary, with the possible exception of the use of animals in research to find cures for serious human illnesses. I think that's morally wrong. But that's our only use of animals that isn't transparently frivolous. All other uses of animals are completely transparently frivolous. Okay? I mean, when we say, well, we shouldn't impose unnecessary suffering on animals, it's not necessary to eat animal products, period. So all suffering, even a little eensy-ween, any amount of suffering is unnecessary suffering. Because the only justification we have is palate pleasure, and that can't serve as a justification for exploiting animals. Okay, so in the 1960s and the early 70s, the animal liberation movement, or what began to be called the animal rights movement, starts. Okay? And people are saying, you know what? We treat animals horribly, and the promise, animal welfare really hasn't done very much. We need to go further. But what do we end up embracing? We end up embracing Peter Singer's position on animal liberation. Peter Singer's position, and this is, again, I find fascinating. The number of people I have met in my life who say, oh yeah, I read Animal Liberation. Does he really say he doesn't endorse rights in that book? Yes, he does. He says it very explicitly. He's a utilitarian like Bentham. He rejects the concept of rights. And he basically says, you can use, animals are different from us. They are not self-aware. Okay? So we can exploit animals, we can use animals, we can exploit animals as long as we treat animals well. This is a quote from, these are 2 quotes from Animal Liberation. In the absence of some form of mental continuity, i.e. self-awareness, it is not easy to explain why the loss to the animal killed is not, from an impartial point of view, made good by the creation of a new animal who will lead an equally pleasant life. So basically, because animals don't have a sense of their lives, because they don't have an interest in continuing to live, because they are not self-aware, okay? If you kill them and replace them with another animal who will lead an equally pleasant life and suffer an equally humane death, that's not a bad thing. That's not a problem. It's not arbitrary to hold the life of a self-aware being capable of abstract thought or planning for the future is more valuable than the life of a being without these capacities. This is the father of the animal rights movement. I mean, these are quotes from Dad. This is the father of the animal rights movement saying that beings that don't have a sense of self-awareness simply don't matter morally as much as beings who have a sense of self-awareness. Okay, this is another quote from Singer. This is not from Animal Liberation. This is from something else. You could say it's wrong to kill a being whenever being is sentient or conscious. Then you would have to say this is wrong to kill a chicken or a mouse. It is to kill you or me. Well, you know what? The mouse or the chicken values his or her life just like you value yours. You know, maybe they can't use symbolic communication to express it. Who cares? I mean, the point is they value their lives. Anybody who has ever been to a slaughterhouse who can say that animals don't have an interest in continuing to live and that they don't value their lives has not been paying attention. Okay? So then he goes on to say, maybe it's just as wrong, but millions of chickens are killed every day. I can't think of that as a tragedy on the same scale as millions of human beings being killed. What is different about humans? They're forward-looking. They have hopes and desires for the future. That seems a plausible answer to the question of why it's so tragic when humans die. So we kill lots of chickens. That's not a tragedy because they are not forward-thinking, the forward-looking beings. This is the animal welfare position. So this is the position that says what we ought to spend our time as animal advocates doing is making animal exploitation more humane. Because they don't really care. They're not forward-looking beings. They don't care that we use them. What they care about is how we treat them and how we slaughter them. Okay? And so as long as we don't impose, this is another quote from father of the animal rights movement. There might be some people who say you can't be compassionate if you end up killing animals. I just think that's wrong. I think as long as the standards really are compassionate ones, they do as much as they can to give the animals decent lives before they're killed. I don't have a problem with it. Okay? That's Singer. I mean, that's not my interpretation of Singer. Those are Peter's own words. Okay? This is the animal welfare position. This is the position that legitimizes and that lays at the foundation of the efforts to make animal exploitation more humane. The idea that what we need to do is minimize the suffering, but the use itself does not present a problem because animals don't have an interest in not being used because they're not forward-looking beings. Okay, this is another quote from him. There's a little bit of room for indulgence in all of our lives. I know some people who are vegan in their homes, but if they're going out to a fancy restaurant, they allow themselves the luxury of not being vegan that evening. I don't see anything really wrong with that. There's this sort of, some people are really into this new age thing, like, well, we ought not to be too harsh on ourselves, and we ought to sort of forgive ourselves. If you want to eat some chicken, or you want to eat some, you want to drink dairy, what the hell? I mean, don't be too hard on yourself. To me, that's like saying, look, as long as you don't molest children most of the time, occasionally, what the hell? I mean, don't be too harsh on yourself. And actually, that thinking, sort of, that new age sort of, don't be too judgmental, don't be hard on yourself, give yourself a little room for sex, is that it pervades this movement, which is why the movement ain't moving forward, it's moving backward. In any event, I think a better position is that sentience is all that's needed. That, you know, there are people who have, well, I don't believe animals live in an eternal present, but I don't know. Because it's very hard. I mean, I don't know what goes on in the problem of other minds, the problem of understanding what goes on in the minds of another in the mind of another person. I mean, we can speak to each other, but you don't really know the content of another person's mind. And so I don't really know whether, I mean, I live with 6 dogs. I don't think I can explain their behavior without some sort of idea that they are forward-looking beings who are self-aware. Are they self-aware in the same way I'm self-aware? And the answer is no, they're not. Because they don't use symbolic communication. They don't use language. I do. And so, you know, I mean, we are animals who use symbolic communication, and our cognitive, you know, our thoughts are very, very much bound up with the abstract concepts that come from our language. And dogs and cats and birds and whatever don't use symbolic communication. But do they think, and are they forward-looking beings? I believe they are. But let's assume they're not. Let's assume they're not. So what? Think about it. You know, there are people who have transient global amnesia. And it's actually fascinating. I've talked to people who have this condition. You know, they have no memory of the past, and they are unable to plan for the future. They do literally live in an eternal present. But they are very self-aware in that present. And they go from one moment to one moment to one moment to one moment, and they value their lives. If you ask somebody who's got transient global amnesia, do you want to die? They'll look at you and say, of course not. You know, I mean, they don't make plans for the future. They don't have memories of the past, but they are self-aware in that second. And in my judgment, that is true of every sentient being. You know, every sentient being is aware of herself in that second. Every single one. I mean, sentience and every single one has an interest in continuing to live. The idea that a sentient being does not have an interest in continuing to live is as insane to me. When somebody says that, when I hear Peter say those things, as a matter of fact, I debated him some years ago, and I remember one of the things I said is, to me, that's like saying a being who has eyes has no interest in continuing to see. Sentience is a means to the end of continuing to exist. Okay? So this idea that we can be sentient but not have an interest in continuing to live is crazy. But it is what this is the animal welfare position, people. When you are out there fighting for bigger cages, or when you're out there campaigning for animal welfare reform, the theory that you are bringing to the table is the idea that we can continue using them. They don't have an interest in not being used. They have an interest in how we treat them. Okay? And it doesn't really matter to me whether you say, gee, I hope in the end we stop using them. The bottom line is what you're arguing for right now in this campaign is for better treatment, not the abolition of use. I think the notion of self-awareness that underlies the animal welfare position is speciesist. It's totally arbitrary. It's like, in order for them to have an interest in their lives, they have to think like us. And I do not see the justification for that. I don't understand the logic of that. I don't even understand what that argument is. I mean that strikes me as being so incredibly arbitrary that they have to think about their lives the way we think about our lives. And I have no idea what you think, how you think about your lives, and I'm sure that we all think differently about our lives. But the idea that animals have to think the way we think, and they have to be self-aware in a human-like way, strikes me as being just nothing but humanocentric arrogance. I do not understand it. I really don't. Okay, so the first problem, the first problem with animal welfare reform is, oh my God. Oh, okay, my watch stopped. All right. So, someone give me a time, please. Yep. Oh, okay. That's still not good. It's okay. But Tim actually started a little bit late, so. Tim, are you here? Tim's not here. Okay, he did. He started late. All right. So the first problem with the animal welfare position is that the whole theory of animal welfare is wrong. It's wrong. It rests on this crazy speciesist notion that animals don't have an interest in continuing to live. Okay? And Singer's position, make no mistake about it, this is Singer's movement. You know, I mean, Peter Singer is the father of the present movement. They all embrace him. They all sell animal liberation. They all promote these ideas. So, I think that's problematic. Second, welfare reform campaigns and single-issue campaigns necessarily promote animal exploitation. I want to go back to a notion I talked about this morning, this notion of coalitions. Welfare reform campaigns and single-issue campaigns involve coalitions. So you get coalitions. You know, you want to oppose. You want to get battery hens out of the battery cages and into enriched cages, which is the current European Union standard. You have a coalition. The coalition consists of people, most of whom are going to continue to eat eggs and other animal products. But they think that, we ought to get the animals out of the battery cages into other battery cages, and so they form coalitions. Animal groups form these coalitions, and they bring people in who are animal exploiters who want to continue to exploit animals, who have no philosophical issues with animal exploitation, and they build these coalitions so that they can get these reforms. The problem is that there's no way you can have a coalition like that without normatively or morally promoting the idea that consuming the eggs from chickens in enriched cages is a morally acceptable thing. Even if it may be a little problematic, it still involves exploitation, it's still a morally acceptable thing. And I defy anybody. I would love to hear the argument. Maybe I will hear it this afternoon. I would love to hear the argument as to why that's not the case. How you can have a welfare reform campaign. If you didn't have those coalitions, the campaigns wouldn't work. Okay? The campaigns depend on building coalitions with people who are going to continue to exploit animals and promote the exploitation of animals. And the only way, and the message that these campaigns send out is that the exploitation, the reformed exploitation, may not be morally perfect, but it's morally acceptable. That, in my judgment, is an extremely unfortunate and dangerous idea because it is promoting animal exploitation. Okay? And that's the same thing with single-issue campaigns. When you are opposing foie gras, or whatever the food is, veal. I remember the big thing was, the big thing in the 90s was veal, right? So everybody's upset about veal. So saying, don't eat veal. Well, if you're not telling them, don't eat veal and any other animal products, what you're telling them is, don't eat veal, don't eat the baby cow, eat the mom. And if that's, if that's what this is about, people, I don't find it very exciting. I don't see that position as a really sort of attractive position to take. That's crazy. Think about it. So when you're saying don't consume foie gras, if you don't say and don't consume any other animal products, what you're basically saying is don't consume goose liver, but eat the chicken instead. And those are the people who are the people in that coalition. They're not vegans. There may be some vegans in the coalition. There may be some people in the organization, or maybe most of the people in the organization who construct these single-issue campaigns or promote these things as fundraising devices. They may be vegan, but the people who are involved in the coalition are not. And if you tell people, and if you don't have the coalition structured that way, you're not going to get donations from the people who have every intention to continue to eat steak and chicken and fish and everything else, but they think foie gras is inhumane. Okay? So these things actually end up promoting exploitation. Because they necessarily promote exploitation because what they're doing is they're creating these coalitions, and the only way these coalitions can work is if the reformed, the reformed treatment in a welfare campaign or the non-targeted product in the single-issue campaigns, those have to be characterized implicitly or explicitly. They have to be characterized as morally better and morally acceptable animal uses or animal products. And that is why these reform campaigns and these single-issue campaigns necessarily involve promotion of exploitation. Okay. Yeah, they promote the idea that foie gras is worse than steak or fur is worse than wool. By implication, coalition members who consume those other animal products are acting more morally. I mean, think about this. So the person in your coalition who is a meat eater but is supporting the effort to get rid of foie gras has got to believe that this campaign is saying, I'm a better person because I don't eat foie gras, I just eat steak and fish, or else that campaign doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It can't work. Okay. Animal welfare campaigns and single-issue campaigns make animal advocates and institutionalized explorers partners with animal people promoting animal exploitation. This is a letter I put up on the screen this morning. This is a letter that Singer wrote on behalf of PETA, Farm Sanctuary, Mercy for Animals, Vegan Outreach, Viva USA, to John Mackey, who is the CEO of Whole Foods, which is one of these high-end supermarket chains that sell happy meat and happy cheese and happy eggs and stuff. And basically saying, expressing, I mean this is Dad again, expressing appreciation and support. Those are words, I don't know if you can read them, but appreciation and support for the pioneering standards of happy exploitation that Whole Foods was in the process of developing, and that they have developed now. According to Mackey, PETA, Farm Sanctuary, Viva USA, and other groups became stakeholders, perhaps a pun, in the Whole Foods Happy Exploitation Program and worked with Whole Foods to help develop supposedly humane methods of exploitation. That's a link. That's a link that you can go to, and you can listen to John Mackey, CEO of Whole Foods, talking about how they had a big meeting, and PETA was there, and all these other groups were there, and Viva was there, and they sat down with the farmers, and they worked out on a species-by-species basis supposedly humane exploitation standards. Now, again, if this works for you, if you think that's a good thing to support, good, do it. No, I can't do anything about it. All I can give you is my ideas. You either accept them or you don't. But the bottom line is, if you don't think that's problematic, we see a very different moral universe. I think that's highly problematic. Highly problematic. As a matter of fact, I think that is a betrayal of animal rights. The idea that animal people sitting down with animal exploiters and saying, okay, well, we ought not to do this, and we ought to do that, and we ought not to use this device, we ought to use that device, and we ought to, it just blows my mind. That anybody thinks that's what animal rights is about, it just blows my mind. Anyway, this is an award. PETA gave Whole Foods an award. The best animal-friendly retailer. Don't tell me that this doesn't make animal people partners with animal exploiters. You're giving them an award as the best animal-friendly retailer. We have labels. We have certified humane choice. We have Freedom Food. That was, I think, the first one here in Britain, Freedom Food. We have Compassion in World Farming, gives out 20 different world farming sites. There's like not one mega corporation that Philip Limbury and his friends over at Compassion in World Farming haven't given an award to. They just give awards to all of these animal exploiters. This makes animal people partners with these corporate exploiters. Again, that works for you, great. Does not work for me. This is Freedom Food. Look, happy person at the top. This is. I just love this. This was on the Humane Society of the United States. They have a farmer outreach program, and they were distributing $1 off on Good Morning Bacon from Applegate Farms. So the Humane Society of the United States, our version of the RSPCA, although it's actually worse in certain ways, but giving out coupons for bacon. Okay. This is Joe Maxwell. He's a vice president of HSUS. Joe Maxwell is a pig farmer. He is a fourth generation Missouri pig farmer. And don't tell me that we're not becoming partners with exploiters. This is a partnership. I showed this slide this morning. This is Ingrid Newkirk praising Bell and Evans, saying that Bell and Evans has set a new standard for the chicken supply industry. My judgment, that's deeply problematic. This was something that came out 2 weeks ago about how all these animal organizations were meeting with hedge funds and all these big business, all these big money types, because they wanted to sit down and figure out to really capitalize and really make all of this happy exploitation stuff as profitable as possible. This is business. This has nothing to do with ending animal exploitation. This has to do with animal organizations, many of which are multi-million-dollar organizations, joining with other wealthy corporate interests to further and promote the exploitation of animals, telling themselves and the people who contribute to them that what we're doing is lessening the suffering of animals. If you believe that, you probably also believe in Santa Claus. Anyway, okay, animal welfare campaigns are speciesist. Welfare campaigns promote humane exploitation where we would never do that where humans are concerned. We would never have humane rape campaigns, humane pedophilia campaigns. When we're talking about fundamental human rights, even when there are pervasive instances of violation, we take an absolutist position. We say, no, we do not believe any of that is justifiable. But when it comes to animals, we talk about Meatless Monday, we talk about cage-free eggs, we talk about crate-free pork. All of a sudden, because we don't believe, because this movement has never embraced the idea that animals have a fundamental right not to be exploited at all. As far as I'm concerned, I don't care how humanely you treat the animal. You have no right, we have no right to take their lives. We have no right to bring them into existence and take their lives. Look, if I go into your bedroom tonight while you're sleeping and I kill you painlessly, I put a bullet in your head, you don't feel anything. Okay, is that better than torturing you? Yes. But have I harmed you? Yes. Have I violated your right? Yes, I have. The same thing holds for non-human animals. And if that is not the case, someone needs to explain to me why it's not the case, because I've been doing it 35 years now and I have not heard the explanation in all of that time. We talk about journeys. I hate that sort of good. Don't be too hard on yourself. We're all on a journey. I tell you, I have a Facebook page, and one of my great pleasures of life is when I see somebody talking about journeys, deleting the comment and banning them. I'm ashamed to say I did a little rush when I do that. Because I find that really, oh my God, I find that really obscene, because we would never do that. If I said, well, I'm on a journey, occasionally I do like to get a little rough, and I do like occasional rape, but I'm on a journey. I'm trying to, I'm getting there, I'm really getting there, but I'm on a journey. You can't tell me that, I absolutely can't do that. Nonsense. If it's wrong, it's wrong. If it violates fundamental rights, it's wrong, and we should not be talking about journeys. Single-issue campaigns treat some animals as having more value than others. This is HSUS saying we should boycott Canadian seafood and eat other people's seafood because we don't like the fact that the Canadians are clubbing seals because they're cute, they have those little eyes, and they're really cute. We fetishize these animals and we think they're cute and all that stuff. So we basically say, let's boycott Canadian seafood. Like, what about the fish, right? And here we have, what? Kangaroos don't have any greater moral value than any other animals. So you've got Viva saying we shouldn't be eating kangaroos. But you've also got Viva, I love this one. We've also got Viva saying that, you should be eating, that what do you want, what can you do? You can eat less meat. Okay? So what they're saying is, you're a morally better person if you're eating less meat, but just don't eat kangaroo meat. And the answer is, what about the cow? What about the chicken? What about the fish? Don't they count as much as kangaroos? Or maybe it's that, we think kangaroos are cute because they carry their babies in pouches and stuff like that, and we have them in cartoons and whatnot. But the bottom line is, morally, they are no different. I love this. This is Saddam Hussein with his fur hat on. Those who wear fur have no respect for life, unlike the business people who put this campaign out who wear wool suits. Single-issue campaigns promote discrimination against humans. This is probably the most popular. This was around forever. I remember this in the 90s. It takes 40 dumb animals to wear a fur coat, only one to wear it. Okay, so here we have the woman whose top of the body we don't see, and her head we don't see because they don't have brains anyway. All we see her is the skirt with the black stockings and the high heels, and she's a bad person because she's wearing fur. Unlike the boys who are wearing wool and leather and everything else, but the problem is her. You know, I mean, I think this is insidious. I really do. This is a campaign I talked about this morning, a campaign to end the use of chickens in an Orthodox Jewish ritual, where the Orthodox Jews who do this do something that, you know, this happens happens in different places, but it happens primarily in Brooklyn, New York. And these guys, you know, they wave the chickens over their heads, and the sins are supposedly transferred to the chickens, and then they cut their throats. And, you know, animal people go crazy about this, and they're really upset, and they're doing all sorts of things to try to bring this to an end. And you know what? If they weren't using them where they're using them right now in Brooklyn, 2 blocks away, they'd be at the slaughterhouses, because there's a zillion chicken slaughterhouses in Brooklyn. And so they would be at the chicken slaughterhouses in Brooklyn, where they would be going through the same thing. And when I suggested to this organization, this is a campaign of something called United Poultry Concerns. And when I suggested to the people at United Poultry Concerns, why don't you at least, if you're going to do this, I don't agree with this, but if you're going to do it, at least do it so that, you know, at least put a statement there saying, we don't think the Orthodox Jews are doing anything different from anybody who eats chicken is doing the same thing. This is not a problem with Orthodox Jews, this is a problem with anybody who's consuming animal products. And they wouldn't do it. Okay? Why? This is a single issue campaign. The idea is to sort of promote the idea, actually, that those of us who otherwise exploit animals are better than these Orthodox Jews because of what they're doing. I think that promotes anti-Semitism. This was something from a couple years ago where, you know, they were talking about Britain, you know, about the fact that a lot of the meat that you buy here in Britain is halal. This is a quote from Viva. Religious freedom does not override other moral considerations, and the suffering caused by this form of slaughter is so severe it can't be allowed to prevent action from taken. Consumers can do their bit by boycotting places that persist in selling meat from unstunned animals, as if people who do halal or kashrut are doing something worse than what everybody else is doing. You know, I mean, boycotting places that persist in selling meat. What is the message? You tell me. We are all English speakers, I assume. You tell me, what is the meaning of this if you're saying consumers can do their bit by boycotting places that persist in selling meat from unstunned animals? Means if you go to places, make sure you eat animals that have been stunned, not halal, not kashrut. Make sure that you eat animals who have been stunned. That's the message that gets sent out. I think that's a problem. Animal welfare reforms are ineffective. Animals are, and single issue campaigns are ineffective. Animals are property. Animal welfare will always be at a low level because it costs money to protect their interests, and the only time we will spend that money is when we get an economic benefit in return. That's why historically animal welfare standards have always been very low and have done really very little more than make animal exploitation more efficient. So really what animal people end up doing is sitting around and identifying economically vulnerable practices like veal crate, like the gestation crate, things like that are economically questionable, and where the industry itself is beginning to question the economic utility of these practices, and then animal people build campaigns around these economically vulnerable practices. But the bottom line is we've had 200 years of animal exploitation, and we're exploiting more animals now in more horrific ways than at any point in human history. This doesn't work. All animal welfare does is make the treatment of animal property more rational. It basically provides, to put it in economic terms, animal welfare standards are instructions to animal owners as to how to rationally treat their animal property and how a rational animal owner would treat property if that person had full information. So basically, you end up helping the industry to be more efficient, which is exactly what animal groups are doing. They are working with industry to make animal exploitation more efficient. This is not doing anything to get animals away from the property paradigm. It's further enmeshing them in the property paradigm. It's always been that way. I mean, as I mentioned this morning, the first book I wrote, 20-some odd years ago, was Animals, Property, and the Law, which actually somebody came up to me. Where are you, John? There he is. He came up. He actually had a copy of the book. I was amazed, and he's actually read it, because it's dense. But what I did in that book was basically surveyed British and American animal welfare law And I concluded that it did very little to, I mean, it did nothing to move animals away from the property paradigm. What it did was it made the treatment of animal property more economically efficient, so that animal people were, in effect, working with industry to make animal exploitation more economically efficient, and that this was really not getting us anywhere. Same thing with, you know, in terms of ineffectiveness. And single-issue campaigns do nothing but substitute one form of exploitation for another form of one exploited product for another exploited product. So we're not saying don't eat foie gras or anything else. We're saying don't eat foie gras. And the message that gets sent out is, okay, so eat something else. You're a better person if you eat something else. These people are not, you know, they're not saying, oh yeah, no foie gras, I'm going to eat tofu. That's not what's happening, okay? That is not what is happening. The message that is getting sent out is, if you eat other animal products, you are a morally better person. You know, I mean, the two longest running campaigns, single issue campaigns, the anti-vivisection campaign started in the 19th century. It is the longest running campaign. The anti-fur campaign is the second longest, right? Vivisection, there are more animals in Britain, elsewhere, but in Britain, where it actually dipped in the 70s, in the early 80s. There are more animals being used in vivisection in 2015 than there were, you know, when it was at its height in the 1970s. Okay, single-issue campaigns don't work. Anti-fur, the fur industry is stronger than it has ever been. Okay, I mean, I remember in the 70s, when I was living in Britain in the 70s, you very rarely saw fur on London streets. Now, yesterday I was just amazed to see. I mean, it was actually not that warm, or not that cold rather, but the amount of fur I saw on a lot of young people. I mean, it's very clear that the whole anti-fur campaign has completely failed. Single-issue campaigns don't work. The bottom line is, until we stop eating them, nothing changes. And once we stop eating them, everything changes. And so, you know, I mean, I'm opposed to all animal exploitation. You know, I don't eat them. I don't wear them. As a matter of fact, you know, I carry, you know, because the soap in these restrooms, they have lanolin. So I carry my own little hand sanitizer. You know, I don't use any animal products. But people always say to me, why do you focus so much on eating animals? And the answer is, well, think about it. You know, every other use of animals that we make is nothing in comparison to eating them 3 times a day, or however many times we eat. And so the bottom line is, until you get people to stop sticking them in their mouths and having that relationship with animals, that intimate relationship with animals, where you're making them part of your body, nothing will ever change. So, you know, you can have all the single-issue campaigns in the world you want. None of them, they don't work. None of them has ever worked. For all intents and purposes. I mean, look at the fox hunting ban, supposed ban in this country. I mean, does anybody really think that that should be called a ban of anything? I mean, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. Well, right. It worked for the fox on the day. Okay, that you saved. Let's think about that for a second. So, do you think that when you think about the resources that went into that campaign, and the fact that there are actually now more hunts than there were before the ban, and that it's perfectly legal to shoot the fox, it's perfectly legal to have the fox flushed out and killed by a bird of prey, that's perfectly fine. So, I mean, this idea that, well, we do something, you know, well, I would like to think with all the millions of dollars and zillions of hours of labor, maybe we saved one life. But you know what? It's a zero-sum game. At some point in time, you got to ask yourself, is this really what we ought to be doing? Or should we be putting our time into educating people about veganism and why they shouldn't be eating animals at all? Because you know what? Vegans don't fox hunt. Vegans don't support fox hunting. So if you get people to go vegan and you educate people about veganism, you're going to have a much better return on all the time you put in and all the money you put in than with those sorts of campaigns. Part two for which I have little time. The importance of veganism is a moral imperative. There is no vegan movement right now. I mean, there's a grassroots vegan movement that we are, that basically we are trying to start. There is no vegan movement. Veganism is presented as a way of reducing suffering by all of these groups. None of these groups present veganism as a moral imperative. That is, none of these groups are saying that you cannot, that veganism is what we are obligated to do, that if animals matter at all, we are obligated morally to go vegan. That basically we have two choices. It's like I give my students multiple choice tests. It's like you got A, you got B, you don't have C. You're either a vegan or you're an animal exploiter. There is no C. So you're either A or B. There is no C. And so but there are no groups that say that. There are no groups that say veganism is a moral imperative. They say it's a way of reducing suffering. It may be the best way of reducing suffering, but there are lots of other things. Don't be too hard on yourself. Don't be judgmental. Don't be a purist. Being a veggie is, I hate that, veggie, veg. It's like all of these sort of non-vegan terms that people use. It's perfectly all right. Eat less meat. It just blows my mind that, that organizations are saying to people, just eat less meat. Because what you're saying is, you're saying that eating less meat is a morally better, it's a morally acceptable situation. You're not, it would be like saying, well, think about it if you don't want to be speciesist, if you reject speciesism, all you need to do is think about it in the human context. Would anybody say, well, what can you do? Well, you can molest a little less. You can rape a little less. You can, would anybody say something like that? We would rightly find that morally odious. But when it comes to animals, we say, eat a little less meat. And the answer is, that's not solving the problem. That's not changing the paradigm. That's not changing the way people think. That's not getting people to see the moral urgency of this issue. So, anyway, what I argue is that if we take animals seriously, we need to see veganism not as one of the 80 million options out there that we can pursue as because we don't want to be judgmental or we don't want to be purist or whatever. That we need to shift the paradigm. We need to reconceptualize things and say that veganism is a moral imperative. It's what we're obligated to do. If you take animals seriously, if you regard animals as being having any moral value at all, you can't eat them, you can't wear them, you can't use them. I often say to people, and you know what? Every time I actually enjoy this. The other thing I like, the thing I like next, other than banning people from my site who talk about journeys, is the fun I have when I post. If you say you love animals but you eat them, you need to think about what love means. And because I always get well, you're being judgmental, you're being curious, and you're being divisive, and I just ban it. That's why God created a ban button. Just pop it, you pop it. But this idea that that veganism is some sort of option is a problem. We need to see veganism as a moral requirement, and that's where what I'm trying to do is coming in. It's basically what I'm trying to do is empower people and get people to recognize each of you is a leader. You don't need these organizations. You don't need these animal businesses, these bloated these charitable corporations. You don't need them. I'm sure the people who work in those places are sincere and they care about what they're doing. I have no doubt about it. We don't need them. What we need is a grassroots movement. Remember something, Fidel took over Cuba with like 23 people. Now I'm not saying, I'm not saying that we need, I'm saying that we can do this. We can do this. I gave some numbers this morning, and those numbers are, there's like 63 million people in Britain. And the lowest estimate of vegans I could find was 150,000. If every one of those people convinces one other person to go vegan every year, Britain is vegan in 10 years. So like, are you trying to tell me that each of you can't convince one other person to go vegan? I'm sure you probably already have done that. We're in October. I'm sure that every person in this room has probably influenced at least one other. I mean, I had people coming up to me after the talk this morning who were telling me stories about how, I got people in my office to go vegan. I got people, I mean, that's what the revolution is about. The revolution is about creative, nonviolent, vegan education, which we can all do, which we all must do, and if we do it, we can change things. Because you know what? And look, I understand. I'm not stupid. I understand that you say, well, but that's not going to get the world vegan overnight. Well, I got news for you. Nothing's going to get the world vegan overnight. But we could get the world vegan a hell of a lot sooner than we're going to get it vegan by telling people the solution to the moral problem is to eat cage-free eggs or crate-free pork or whatever. I mean, nothing's going to change it overnight, but nothing's going to change, period, if we don't make a concerted decision to say, this is serious. This is not a matter of your journey. This is not a matter of like how you feel about it. This is a matter of fundamental justice. And if we take it seriously as a matter of fundamental justice, then we've got to educate people about why it's a matter of fundamental justice. And you know what? I'm tired of hearing people say people don't understand this. They understand it fine. They understand it absolutely fine. You can talk to people about this. I do it every day of my life. I don't engage in complex discussions about philosophy. I mean, I don't get into, if somebody wants to get into philosophy, I will get into philosophy. I teach philosophy. But I generally don't. It's not necessary. All I need to do is to get them. If I say to somebody, do you agree that it's wrong to inflict unnecessary suffering on animals? If they say yes, if I've got 30 minutes, I'll get them. Because all you need to do is accept that it's wrong to inflict unnecessary suffering on animals. I'll get you to see, you may not go vegan immediately, but I'll get you to see why it's the right thing to do. You start, just 2 minutes, 2 minutes.
We'll have a diet, I'd love to listen to that.
Okay. There's no morally coherent distinction between meat and dairy. This idea that vegetarianism is a morally incoherent position. This is again from the Viva website, because I'm debating Tony later on, so I thought I would use some Viva things. Elvis Costello, vegetarian. Frank Nero, vegetarian. Jesus Butler. These people are engaging in animal exploitation. They're drinking milk and eating eggs. They're not eating meat. So what? There's as much suffering and death in a glass of milk as there is in a pound of steak. So the idea that animal organizations are promoting vegetarianism is a really problematic idea. This is again from the Viva website. What can you do? This is at the top of every page. What can you do? Change your diet. Go veggie or vegan. So in other words, continue to exploit animals, but only exploit dairy animals, only exploit chickens instead of meat, or eat less meat. What sort of message is this sending out? The bottom line is, we can do this. We can do this, but we've got to want to do it, and you've got to stop thinking that this is someone else's responsibility. It's your responsibility, it's my responsibility, it's our responsibility. We can change the world if we want it. The world is vegan if we want it. Peace.